Everything started when this guy decided to invade Malaysia. Contrary to what you may think though, he was not a recognized country leader, but a self-proclaimed sultan of a country that no longer existed. So basically, you may say, a random grandpa with some ridiculous claims says something equally as ridiculous and nothing happens, as expected, right? Right?
The Sultan of Sulu has reiterated his order to his followers.
Attacks on armed Filipinos in Sabah.
Claim of our ancestral domain.
It's February 11th, 2013. More than 200 people sails out from Tawi-Tawi in the Philippines to Lahad Datu, a village in Sabah, Malaysia. They call themselves Royal Security Forces of the Sultanate of Sulu and North Borneo, and are followers of Jamalul Kiram III, the self-proclaimed Sultan of Sulu, whose brother, Agbimuddin Kiram, led the military command. They stayed here, in the city of Lahad Datu, and having no one but themselves supporting their actions, they quickly lost. After 3 weeks of negotiations, Malaysian security forces launched a military offensive, swiftly capturing and unaliving all the insurgents on March 24th, same year. So, the self-proclaimed Sultan turns out to have some real influence, and he's not just another delusional basement dweller. But who was he, really? Jamalul Kiram III was born in Maimbung, the heart of the Sulu Archipelago, into the royal family of the Sultanate of Sulu. But by then, the title of Sultan was purely symbolic. This guy is Jamalul Kiram II, who in 1915 relinquished his claims over Sulu, and since then they had held no real authority over any territory. For centuries, the Sultanate of Sulu was a regional Thalassocratic powerhouse, spanning parts of present-day Borneo, Palawan, Mindanao, and the Sulu Archipelago, predating both modern Malaysia and the Philippines by hundreds of years. In recent years, that once mighty sultanate has been reduced to this, a modest house in the suburbs of Manila. There, a partially blind and ailing Kiram kept dreaming of restoring his ancestors' power, calling himself the poorest sultan in the world. But why do the descendants of the sultanate still claim Sabah? To understand that, we need to go back a little. It's 15th century. Arab explorer Shariful Hashim, born in Johor, arrives in the lands of the Tausug people, who mostly live here, in the Sulu Archipelago. Instead of a violent conquest, he chooses to marry the daughter of a local chief, and subsequently unites the scattered tribes, declaring himself Sultan. He establishes the first Islamic monarchy in what is now the Philippines, blending Sharia law with the traditional Datu chiefdom system. The Datu chiefdom system in pre-colonial Philippines was a decentralized political structure where independent communities, called barangays, were ruled by Datus, local chieftains. Each barangay typically had 30 to 100 families and functioned as a small, self-governing polity. Datus held authority based on heredity, bravery, and wisdom, governing with the Council of Elders. They led in warfare, trade, lawmaking, and diplomacy, often forming alliances through marriage or economic agreements. Unlike centralized kingdoms, these chiefdoms operated independently, though some, like those in Luzon and Mindanao, developed into larger confederations or Islamic sultanates. The system persisted until Spanish colonization in the 16th century. During its peak, the Sultanate of Sulu became a major maritime trade hub in Southeast Asia, strategically located along the Sulu Sea, between the Philippines, Borneo, China, and the rest of Malay archipelago. Sulu established early ties with the Ming dynasty, and Chinese merchants frequently visited Jolo, the capital of Sulu, trading silk, ceramics, and tropical hardwoods. A Sulu envoy traveled to the Ming court in 1417, and a Sulu ruler, Paduka Batara, died in China, where his tomb remains today. The Sultanate maintained connections with the Ottoman Empire and Arab countries, and its merchants were traveling to Mecca and Medina as well. But it was not only the trade. The Sultanate of Sulu was a thalassocracy, a state that derives its power primarily from maritime dominance. During its peak, the Sultanate of Sulu was one of the most powerful maritime states in Southeast Asia. Unlike European colonial powers, which relied on large, slow-moving warships, the Sulu Sultanate built a fast, mobile, and highly efficient naval force. Sulu warriors primarily used lanong, long warships, and garay, larger boats, collectively called proas by Europeans. These ships were light, swift, and highly maneuverable, allowing them to outrun and outmaneuver Spanish galleons. Sulu's naval forces were not centralized under the Sultan, but rather led by independent Datus and warlords. Crews were composed of Tausuks, Iranun, Bajos, and other seafaring group of people. From the 14th to the 16th century, the Empire of Brunei ruled the waves of Southeast Asia, controlling vast parts of Borneo, the Philippines, and key trade routes in the Sulu Sea. Its dominance was built on naval power, strategic alliances, and control over regional commerce. But where did the Sultanate of Sulu fit into this picture? Historians debate whether Sulu was ever a vassal of Brunei. While Brunei was initially the stronger power, several signs suggest Sulu maintained its independence. Most importantly, unlike typical vassal states, Sulu never paid tribute to the Brunei Sultan. It also exercised full control over its foreign affairs, waging wars against Spain, the Dutch, and Portugal, without Brunei's involvement. Additionally, Sulu maintained direct diplomatic ties with China and the Ottoman Empire, further proving it was not under Brunei's authority. Though Brunei was initially more powerful, the balance shifted in 1658, when Sultan Wad-Din of Brunei, facing a dangerous rebellion, sought help from Sulu. After crushing the revolt, he rewarded Sulu Sultan with a significant gift, which was North Borneo. This act would have lasting consequences. Over time, Sulu expanded its influence into Mindanao, Palawan, and northeastern Borneo, transforming itself into a maritime power in its own right. More importantly, the 1658 land grant became the foundation of Sulu's claim over Sabah, an issue that continues to spark political tensions to this day. From the late 17th to early 18th century, the Sultanate of Sulu became infamous for its relentless Moro raids, swift and brutal attacks on Spanish settlements in the Visayas. These raids weren't just about warfare. They were calculated strikes to capture slaves, gold, and weapons. Among the most frequently enslaved were the Visayans, to the point that in Mindanao the word Bisaya became synonymous with slave. Spain made repeated attempts to crush Sulu's power, but they failed time and again. The Sultanate's strength was in its highly mobile navy and decentralized military, making it nearly impossible to conquer. To defend against the raids, the Spaniards built fortifications, watchtowers, and heavily defended churches across the Visayas, particularly in Cebu, Bohol, Iloilo, and Leyte. Yet, despite these efforts, Sulu maintained its dominance over the Sulu Sea. The Moro raids were part of the larger Spanish-Moro Wars, a brutal conflict that lasted over 300 years from 1578 to 1898. It began soon after Spain established control over the Philippines and ended only when the archipelago was handed over to the United States. During this time, Spain aggressively pushed to Christianize and dominate the southern Philippines. While they succeeded in the Visayas, Mindanao and Sulu refused to bow. The Muslim sultanates fought back fiercely, launching raids on Spanish-controlled settlements, and in response, Spain struck back with equally brutal military campaigns, leading to centuries of bloodshed and resistance. One of Spain's most ambitious offensives was the Balanguingui expedition. I'm pretty sure I'm completely butchering this name. Led by Governor Narciso Claveria. This naval campaign targeted the Tausug and Samal strongholds in the Sulu Archipelago, aiming to cripple Sulu's pirate fleets. Spain, now armed with steam-powered warships, finally gained an advantage over Sulu's traditional prowess. By 1851, Spain declared Sulu a protectorate after a series of military campaigns. While the Sultanate retained some autonomy, Spanish control was never absolute. Sulu remained a hotbed of Moro resistance, and even as Spain expanded its foothold in Mindanao and Sulu in the 80s, it never fully subdued the Moros. But Sulu was no longer independent either. History seemed to repeat itself when the Sultanate of Sulu found itself pressured by Spain. Just as Brunei had once rewarded Sulu with Sabah in 1658, the Sultanate now turned to Britain for support. In exchange for financial return, Sulu transferred Sabah to the British, using it as a bargaining tool, just as it had been used before. The 1878 concession treaty, signed by Sultan Jamalul Alam, transferred North Borneo from the Pandasan River in the north to the Sibuko River in the south to the British North Borneo Company. In exchange, the company agreed to annual payments of $5,000. A key point of contention here is the term pajakan, which can be interpreted as either lease or cession. This ambiguity has fueled a long-standing dispute. Malaysia considers the payment as compensation for the permanent cession of Sabah, while the Sulu heirs view it as a rent, implying that sovereignty has never been fully relinquished. This difference in interpretation remains at the heart of the Malaysia-Sulu dispute today. In 1903, Sultan Jamalul Kiram II signed another agreement ceding additional islands near North Borneo, including the Bangi Islands, in exchange for an increased annual payment of $5,300. And if you were wondering, like I was, why Spanish-controlled Sulu was using dollars when dealing with the British, here's a quick breakdown. In 1497, Spain introduced the Spanish dollar, which became the first global currency by the 16th century. It was widely used not just in Spanish colonies, but also across Europe, the Americas, and Asia, influencing many future currencies, including the Mexican peso, Philippine peso, and even the US dollar. One key example was the Strait Settlements, a British colony in present-day Malaysia and Singapore. Until 1847, they used Indian rupees, but those weren't suitable for trade. Instead, they adopted a new local currency equivalent to the Spanish dollar and its regional successors, like the Philippines peso. By 1903, this currency became known as the Straits Dollar, and it was officially used across all British territories in Malayas. In 1939, the Malayan dollar and Sarawak dollar replaced the Strait Dollar, and later they were merged into the Malaya and British Borneo dollar. After gaining independence, Malaysia, Brunei, and Singapore each renamed their currencies to Malaysian, Bruneian, and Singaporean dollars, respectively. They were all initially interchangeable, but later Malaysia decided to leave the dollar union and introduced its own currency, the Malaysian ringgit. This is why, in modern times, lease payments for Sabah are made in ringgits and not dollars. A few years ago, I actually tried it myself, and while I could pay in Singaporean dollars in Brunei, I didn't have much luck in paying with Bruneian currency in Singapore though. In 1898, the Treaty of Paris saw Spain hand over control of the Philippines to the United States, but the Sulu Archipelago was initially granted special status as an autonomous region. Fast forward to 1915 when the Carpenter Agreement was signed. This allowed the Sultan of Sulu to keep his religious authority, but he needed to give up his political powers to the US government. While the Sultanate officially lost its political influence that year, the title of Sultan continued to be claimed by various individuals, long after the Sultanate itself ceased to be a political entity. And then, in 1946, the Philippines finally gained independence, followed by Malaysia 10 years later. The Philippines, seeing itself as the successor to the Sultanate of Sulu, claim that Eastern Sabah was never truly ceded to the British. Instead, they argue that in 1878, the Sultanate only leased the land to the British North Borneo Company. That means, in their view, sovereignty over Sabah still belongs to the Philippines. Malaysia, on the other hand, completely rejects this claim. They interpret the agreement as a full cession, not a lease. What's more, they argue that when Sabah's people voted to join the Malaysian Federation in the 60s, they exercised their right to self-determination, settling the issue once and for all. This disagreement even led the Philippines to cut off diplomatic ties with Malaysia, but tensions cooled with the Manila Accord, an agreement between the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Under this deal, the Philippines agreed to settle the disputes peacefully, but never actually dropped this claim. The Philippines didn't stop at just claiming Sabah. In 1968, under President Ferdinand Marcos, a top-secret military operation was put into motion, which was Operation Merdeka. Operation Merdeka was a plan to train an elite commando unit, infiltrate Sabah, and destabilize it. The goal was to weaken Malaysian control over the region and pave the way for a Philippine takeover. Leading this mission was Major Eduardo Abdul Latif Martelino, a Muslim convert who was tasked with overseeing the special forces unit known as Jabita. These men were trained in guerrilla warfare and sabotage, preparing for a covert assault on Sabah. But the operation never fully took off, as things fell apart from the inside. The recruits, many of them young Muslim Filipinos, faced harsh treatment, lack of clear mission objectives, and growing discontent. Some even mutinied, and that's when things took a dark turn. To keep the operation secret, Dozens of these recruits were allegedly executed by the very military that trained them. This event is known as the Jabita massacre. The fallout was massive. Not only did it escalate tensions between the Philippines and Malaysia, but it also fueled the Moro separatist movement in Mindanao, igniting one of the longest-running insurgencies in Southeast Asia. The Moro movement in the Philippines refers to the struggle of Muslim Moro people in Mindanao, Sulu, and Palawan for autonomy or independence from the Philippine government. This movement has historical roots in resistance against Spanish and American colonization, and it intensified in the 20th century due to political marginalization, land disputes, and religious tensions. To fight for their cause, several organizations emerged, such as the Moro National Liberation Front, which sought full independence, or the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, advocating for greater autonomy rather than outright independence. This eventually led to the creation of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao in 2019. There are also two more radical militant groups, namely Abu Sayyaf, known for and some violent attacks, and it has historically been linked to Al-Qaeda and later pledged allegiance to ISIS. At one point, Malaysia actively supported the Moro movement, largely as retaliation for the Philippines' attempts to reclaim Sabah. However, this support eventually faded after some Moro leaders misused power, leading Malaysia to withdraw its backing. The legal dispute intensified in 2013 after the Lahad Datu standoff, an armed incursion by Sulu claimants into Sabah. In response, Malaysia ceased the annual payments to the Sulu heirs, arguing that they had violated the agreement. Seeking compensation, the Sulu heirs filed an arbitration case in Spain in 2017. In February 2022, Spanish arbitrator Gonzalo Stampa ruled that Malaysia must pay 15 billion USD in compensation. Around the same time, a Paris court found that Malaysia had violated the 1878 treaty by stopping payments and ordered Malaysia to compensate the Sulu heirs. Malaysia, however, rejected the rulings, arguing that it had never agreed to arbitration. The Malaysian government fought back in 2023, successfully challenging the decision in courts in France and Luxembourg, blocking the Sulu heirs from seizing Malaysian assets. For now, Malaysia firmly rejects the Sulu heirs' claim and continues legal efforts to prevent any asset seizure. Meanwhile, the Philippine Supreme Court has ruled that the country's claim over Sabah remains valid and could be potentially pursued in the future, keeping the dispute unresolved and a potential flashpoint for future tensions. If the Philippines still acknowledge their claims to Sabah, why didn't they support Jamalul Kiram III? Then President Benigno Aquino III made the government's stance clear in a statement directed at Kiram. I appeal to you, we should be really clear on this. This incident is wrong. If this is wrong, why should we lend support to this? We should support what is right, which will lead us to brighter prospects. The wrong option will only bring us ruin. That's it. That's my simple message. He also added, let's not forget, what they are pushing for is their rights, and so-called heirs of the Sultan of Sulu. It's not clear if their rights have been transferred to the Philippines, but we will all be affected by their conflict. To put it simply, the Filipino government didn't necessarily disagree with the claim, just the method. They didn't want to escalate tensions, but also weren't willing to give up a massive territorial claim over a significant and strategic land. This makes sense, considering the Philippines has historically tied itself to the Sulu Sultanate. While Manila stopped officially recognizing Sulu sultans in 1936, this changed in 1962, when President Diosdado Macapagal acknowledged Sultan Muhammad Ismail Kiram, directly linking the Philippines to the Sulu royalty. However, Jamalul Kiram III was never officially recognized by the government. After Ismail's death, President Marcos recognized Ismail's son, Muhammad Mahakuttah Abdullah Kiram, as the new sultan, and later, in 80s, Ismail's grandson, Muezzul Lail Tan Kiram. Meanwhile, Jamalul Kiram III came from a different branch of the family and was one of several competing claimants. His side of the family questioned the legitimacy of the officially recognized sultans, arguing that the Philippine government had no right to designate them. According to them, in Tausug tradition, Sultan must undergo a specific Giba ceremony, an important cultural rite. Kiram's father, Muhammad Punjungan Kiram, brother of Ismail, claimed that he was the rightful heir to North Borneo. However, instead of asserting his claim from the Philippines, he flew to Malaysia and declared himself Sultan there, with only partial recognition among the community. Jamalul Kiram III inherited the claim from his father in 1983.
I thought to myself, Sultan of Sulu? I didn't even know there was one. It was the first I'd ever heard of him.
So, is this the end of the Sultanate of Sulu? Not at all. The royal family still exists, and the Philippines has never renounced its claim to Sabah. While a future attempt to retake the territory seems highly unlikely, the issue remains a powerful bargaining chip in negotiations. Adding to the intrigue, legal battles over Sabah are still ongoing, with courts often ruling in favor of either Sulu or Malaysia. So the story isn't over yet. If anything, it's a lingering dispute that could resurface when least expected.